Ladies and gents, welcome to another episode of Optimize Your Body podcast. I got another great guest. We're getting great guests on back to back nowadays. So the guests just seem to be getting better and better. No disrespect to my last guest, you know what I mean? But anyway, Dr. Torkil, great to have you on, man.
Thank you, Martin. Great to be here.
And you're over in Norway, right? Just for the audience?
Yes, I'm in Norway, so I'm on the other side of the world from you. So it's great to be talking to Australia. So it's good.
Exactly. I'm right down the southern hemisphere, down under, and you're right up the northern hemisphere, right towards the top there.
Yeah, yeah. Whereabouts are you located? Where in Australia?
I'm in Sydney.
Sydney. All right. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
been there.
yeah.
Yeah, great, great
You've been
place.
here,
Yeah,
yeah? You've been down here?
yeah, yeah. In 1991, I was hitchhiking all across Australia from Melbourne up through Adelaide, Alice Springs, out to Townsville, and out to the Whitsunday Islands, and then down to Sydney. So it was a great adventure. It
Awesome,
was like
man.
2 months or so. Yeah.
Amazing. That's what I did actually, and that's what brought me back here. I did a trip
Mhm.
right up the East Coast just for the audience. Anyone who's been to
Mhm.
Australia, it's a magical experience, right? I did the Whitsunday Islands and stuff as well, and it's a beautiful
Yeah.
place. And that's what brought
Yeah.
me back here. I went to Sydney and I was like, I got to go back there. Came back here, and the rest is history, my man. But yeah, anyway, man, I'd love to just get in and just for you to kind of share with the audience a bit more about yourself, what it is you specialize in, and what brought you to where you're at today, my man. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'm a Norwegian general practitioner and emergency physician, work in the ER and across Norway, all around Norway. Been having more than 100,000 consultations with patients and seen actually examined 1% of Norway's population. So, but
Wow.
the last years I've been using wearables, like smartwatches and rings and all these new devices that can track our heart rate and our sleep, and how we can use them as a tool to improve our lifestyle. And I've written a book about it, which is actually the world's first book, which is why it's been translated into 8 languages. Just been a wild bestseller in Norway. So I've been kind of in a tornado for the last 2 years, with all the
This is the pulse
attention
cure, yeah,
and
just for
media
the
attention.
audience. The
The
pulse cure.
Pulse Cure, yeah, the Pulse
Yeah.
Cure, about how you are actually using these devices, and what is heart rate variability? How can it affect your system? Why is it important? And all the most important strategies to live like an optimized life. Not necessarily optimized, I would rather say normalized, that we live more in tune with our physiology, that we evolutionary are constructed, to live regarding sleep, movement, rest, food, and all of these things that will affect our stress levels. Because it's all about stress, and we see now that these days, 80% of the diseases that we treat as doctors, it has its base in too much stress and in the chronic low-grade inflammation. And the stress is not only what you would refer to as stress, mental stress, stress at your work, with your family, but it's also the food that we eat stresses us. And also we can train too much, we can train at the wrong time of day. And there's so much things that your heart rate will reveal, because your heart rate will respond to any demand on it, way before we can feel it ourselves. We don't really have a good sense of our stress levels. We have never needed it. It would have been in the way of our outward senses like eyesight and hearing, towards the outward threats. So it's actually a sense that has been muted, to give way to the more important senses. But now we need it, and these wearables is kind of, it's like our body whispers, and we have a poor listening ability. So this is kind of a hearing aid into your own body, through the wearables, I would say.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Yeah, so I want to just kind of start. I'm going to go with like four big rocks here when it comes to health, right? You've already touched on them: sleep, stress, exercise, nutrition, right? Nutrition will cover water in there, of course, being fundamental. So let's start with what you just talked about there, right? I'd love to get into stress, right? Because people are struggling nowadays, right? Because I believe we have a
Mhm.
lot more stress coming in, a different type of stress than we've ever experienced, right? When we were kind of
Mhm.
hunter-gatherers, it would have been, you would think it would be an acute stress, right? You got to run from the tiger, you got to go and hunt for food because you're starving. But now I feel like we've got this constant dose of stress with the emergence of technology, which is amazing. but I feel like we have more of that continuous kind of stress now, and people are on their phones till late. They have that blue light exposure, all these things we've never actually been exposed to for prolonged periods of time as humans, right? So you tell me what it is right now that you see are the most fundamental things that people need to pay attention with stress. And even we will talk about the aura, right? Because I've got the aura ring, which is what I use to track my stress. So we can touch into the HRV stuff and that. But I'd love you to just explain that to the audience, the stress pillar.
Yeah, so the stress is, of course, so much these days. And it's often not necessarily the stress level in itself, but that we're very poor at recovery. We have filled up our time all the time, as you say, with our smartphones. We're doing something all the time, and we often think that that is not a stressor, but it's a very low grade stressor. But added up over time, it's what shifts our body into the stress state where the inflammation happens. And as you say, we were constructed, physiologically in the hunter-gatherer environments where we were stressing, and we have put some wearables on the hunter-gatherers that live today. And what they are doing is being moderately active 2 to 3 hours a day, walking maybe 17,000 steps on an average. But when they're not active, they're just relaxing. So most of the days, they are just relaxing and sitting and moving a little bit all the time. But there are quite a lot of the time they will be in the parasympathetic restful state, the recovery state. But we are not in that state. And of course, it's quite hard to find that state if you don't know where it is. Because what you will quickly find out with your Oura Ring or your Garmin watch is that it takes more to become or into this state than you would think. So we're just putting too much load on our systems, and we're also eating food in particular that is just sapping us of our forces because we're eating inflammatory food that we can see on our wearables that if you eat a certain kind of food, that will affect your heart rate throughout the night, and it will, give you less forces, make your body is not recovering as well as it could.
Absolutely. And that's something I've really picked up on with the aura is food before bedtime, right? So I
Yeah.
know for me, because I have two big meals, quite big meals, three times now actually, but mainly two big meals. And I find I got to give it at least 4 hours ideally. They say at least 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
So, and you can see on the heart rate variability, and let's get into that, right, for the audience, because on these
Mhm.
tracking devices, right, you can track your HRV, and you're hearing
Yeah.
lots more experts now talking about how important that is and how kind of low HRV can be linked to certain things like heart issues and stuff like that. I'd love to
Yeah.
know what you would say. Number one, the most important thing is, let's just start with HRV. What you think um, people should look at with HRV and with if they're going to track, should they look at HRV or should they, and what can they do to kind of improve, not necessarily HRV, but to improve, just to optimize their health and sleep.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, we can maybe talk about what HRV is in the first place. Maybe some listeners don't know. I did not know about the concept only 5 years ago, even as a doctor. So it's kind of a concept that has been becoming very, very more known both among doctors and the population in general the last years. But the heart rate variability is a variation between heartbeats. And if you are in the relaxed state, your body is relaxed, is ready for recovery. Then when you breathe in, your heart rate goes up a little bit because there's more oxygen in the lungs and the heart like pushes through a bit more effectively. And then when you breathe out and there's less oxygen, the heart allows itself to relax a little bit. Of course, the heart doesn't know that, but that is what happens. And so we can tell that we are in the relaxed state and how deep into it by the variation between heartbeats. But if we are in the stress state, the sympathetic state, the survival state, the fight, flight, and freeze, but I would also add fun to it, then we have a very regular, steady heartbeat, just like a metronome. And then the wearables can detect this variation from the deep restful state until the full stressful state. And they will record it while you're living your life, and they will, through artificial intelligence, they will be able to tell whether your stress level is sustainable or not, and how it will evolve over time, and according to certain stressors. Like you have found that eating late night meals is terrible for your stress levels, which of course, me as a doctor would never have thought of that. I wouldn't have thought that a late meal would have anything to do with my stress levels. It may have something to do with the digestion, but not with the stress. And many other people will also find that alcohol is just terrible for the stress. That's maybe the worst factor for the stress levels. So when we know that heart rate variability is a measure of the autonomic nervous system and the stress levels, then we can start to regulate it, because it's like if you have, like on your phone, if you have your map, it doesn't help you much until you know where you are on the map, where you see the dot, that explains you're here in Sydney and you want to go there. And it's the same thing with the heart rate variability. So once you can find your heart rate variability through the Oura Ring or the smartwatch, you know where your stress level is. And it will be a surprise to most people that they are mostly more stressed than they would think. And maybe even when they thought they were relaxing, there can be something disturbing their system that shows that they are still in the sympathetic mode. So it's kind of a device. The heart rate variability will kind of show you where your stress level is. And of course, through the artificial intelligence and the measurements of millions of people, this insight into our own nervous system gives us as people, as patients, the power over our health. So it's not so that you need to go to your doctor every third month and get the results that the doctors have. You have the results literally in your hands 24/7 when you want to, and you get the control. So the first lines in my book, The Pulse Cure, is from Albert Schweitzer, a doctor from the 1800s, who said that the doctor of the future will be yourself. And that, I think, is the most important thing about this shift, this information that we now get from our wearables, that we can be the kind of CEOs of our own health.
Absolutely. And if we go back to what you were talking about there with inflammation, this is a big
Mm,
issue, right? Chronic inflammation
that's
is
right.
is one of the lead causes, right, of obviously chronic illness, plays a big part in that. So if we take the wearables out of it, I want to get deeper into the HRV stuff and how people can track this data. But if you look at the state of humans on a global level right now, people are essentially getting fatter and sicker, right? And I always say
Mm,
that the two, I think the foundation is sleep and stress. I think if one of those things are out, I've noticed with
mm,
clients, it just becomes a
mm,
problem because it'll impact everything else, right? Your decision making with food, the ability to recover from training, your mental clarity and
mm.
productivity, and all those kind of things. So, based on
Yeah.
what you've seen as a doctor, what do you feel like people are doing, which is really causing them most of these issues when it comes to maybe just using sleep and stress as an example, a
Mm.
foundation? Is it,
Yeah,
with
they're all.
the blue light, we've got technology, we've got people drinking alcohol,
Mm,
right? Which, as you say, I've noticed that as well. I don't
yeah.
really drink much, but when I do on the Aura,
Mm,
I'll do it like, if I ever do it, it'll be like one in the daytime, early in the daytime, you know what I mean? Because I don't want to risk
mm.
the mess up with my
Yeah,
sleep.
yeah, yeah. So what we're really doing is we're doing a lot of things wrong, a little bit wrong. We're sleeping too little. We are staying inside our houses, not getting out into the sun. We're not exposed to temperature differences. We're eating the wrong food. We're exercising either too much or too little. It can be a bit hard to find the level of exercise that you need, um, because you may need too much recovery and you may train too much also. But most people, of course, they are training too little, moving too little, getting too weak, so that almost everything becomes stressful. If your body is too weak, you have a weak heart, you have a low VO2 max. And we drink alcohol, eat food that we're not supposed to eat. So and of course, we also mentally stress more. We may be working more hours than we should. We are busy all the time. We are shifting the circadian rhythm somewhat, probably everyone. And the most important thing is to do a little bit on all of these different fronts, so to speak, so that you sleep a little bit better, eat a little bit better, move more like you're supposed to, and so on. Drink less alcohol, and then you will find your balance. And this is the reason for the success of the book, that this actually works. That when you get this kind of physiological speedometer for your own health, you're so much more able to find the balance. Because otherwise you're in the dark. You're just guessing where your stress balance is, and when you find it, this measurement is so much easier to understand that, okay, if I drink only one night a month, that it has so much to do with my stress levels compared to like every other day or so. So, of course, when you see it, it's also motivating, to do cold plunges, for example. When you see the effect of it on your heart rate many hours afterwards, it's so much more motivating to do this. And it becomes almost like a gamification for most people, that you get this, suddenly it's like a game, where your life is at stake, and not just an avatar that you're playing with, but it's your health, your well-being, and your longevity that is depending on the heart rate variability. Because we now have so much research, because heart rate variability is such an easy metric to get for the researchers. There's so much research. So if you Google heart rate variability and cancer or heart disease or dementia or high blood pressure or metabolic syndrome or autoimmune disease, there's so much research on all of this. Because a low heart rate variability shows that your system is under pressure, and what has to give often, that is the immune system. So that if you have a poor immune system because of too much stress, it paves the way for all of these modern day diseases that can kind of go through, because diseases is continually occurring in our body, and our immune system is continually working on it, and and dealing with it. So we kind of have a self-healing system, once we let it do its job, and not spend our energy and everything else. So just as we find this balance, the immune system works fine. It's more capable of dealing with cancer, dealing with heart disease, keeping our body working really.
Mm. I actually just interviewed a guy that actually you brought me onto. Actually, his name is Paul, and I forgot his surname. The neuroscientist, Paul. He's here in Australia in Melbourne, and he interviewed you
Paul
on
Taylor, all right.
Paul Taylor. That's right, yeah. And he was
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about resilience, right? So everything you're alluding to here,
Mm,
essentially, it's just doing challenging stuff and challenging your body. But like, I got to a really good level, right? And I only actually got to the next level when I started tracking these things. So the next level for me was
mm.
I should be having a partnership with these companies. I keep calling them out, right? I'm gonna have to get some sort of partnerships. I keep mentioning them. No, but I had Whoop first, and that really
Mm,
was a game changer for me because then I was aware. And it's like what gets measured can get managed, right? Once you've got the data,
mm,
you have something to work with to actually improve on. And I'm very
mm,
competitive, and you get competitive with
mm,
yourself as well, then, right? Because it's gamification, like you said. So it's like you're playing
mm,
a game with yourself and challenging yourself. So I got the Whoop, then I moved on and got an Aura, and that has
mm,
really been a massive eye opener. For example, what you were saying about ice baths. I know I like to
mm,
lift weights. That's my main form of exercise. And what I found was,
mm,
when I was doing ice baths, I couldn't lift weights as often. Obviously, I noticed if I do an ice bath, I couldn't do
mm,
strength training on the same day. It would be too much for my body. I wouldn't recover. My HRV would
mm,
drop, would have a negative impact on sleep. So I
mm,
ended up, because I love lifting weights so much and playing volleyball, I was like, there's only so much I can do, right? And I feel great lifting weights, playing volleyball, staying active, eating well. I feel great. So
mm,
I cut out the ice baths. So I
mm,
think everyone's got a different amount of stress that they can actually tolerate, right? And these devices are really good at picking up on that. And
mm.
kind of touched on
Yeah.
this in your book as well, right? Because I'd love you to just tell the audience what your kind of core message is, when it comes to HRV.
Yeah. So I must say that, okay, I also used Whoop and Aura, but what can help you micromanage your stress levels? That would be Garmin. So when I'm talking about, seeing the effect of a certain meal or a certain cold water plunge or whatever, that would be Garmin. That can show you in real time. They will give you a graph, 24 hours. You can see that, okay, this like a couple of nights ago, evenings ago, I had a meal with, it was a, I don't know what it's called in English, but it's a lamb meal that has been very salted. And that is terrible for the stress levels. Give me super high stress throughout the night. And the day before, I had a fish soup, with a lot of fish and shrimps and so on in it. But you can see that there's no stress for the system. While the other meal is a very high stress, but it's so much easier to see that when you see these graphs, these 24 hours graphs from Garmin. So this is how you use it, that you can use it to detect certain energy thieves, that you could say that, okay, this you're using a lot of forces on this meal that makes it, you don't even want to run. You don't even want to exercise because your body is still working, dealing with this meal that is affecting your body. So this is how I would use it to just see how much pressure is on my system at any given time, and then just seeing, okay, this saps me of forces. Maybe somebody would see that when I work with this certain colleague, that's a lot of stress. When I work with another colleague, that is very restful, and when you can see that, it's also easier to try to deal with that in a better way, maybe through breath work, which is the best way to do it, to breathe slowly, to calm yourself down through the breath. Otherwise, also through cold, as you say, the cold is very, very potent to calm down your nervous system. So, and that may be because it was, our physiology is evolved in Africa, and during the night there, it's also cold. So they're thinking, the expert, that maybe the reason why the cold is so effective for dampening inflammation is that it's a biological signal that it's nighttime and that we can start doing the recovery work. And you also said that, regarding the Whoop band and what can be measured, we now see that, the footballers, maybe you're not so much into football in Australia, it's the footy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like Cristiano Ronaldo and Erling Haaland, the Norwegian, they're all using Whoop bands and different ways to be able to recover better, because we know so much more now about the importance of recovery, that you cannot only push and lift weights and run. You have to make sure that you're very good at recovery to get the payback from that effort. If you just do that workout and go have another workout too soon, you're not getting the payback for it. So you could Google HRV and training, and you would find that if you adjust your training according to your heart rate variability, you can exercise less and become better. So it's such an important tool, as you say, what can be measured can be managed. Yeah.
100%. And the good thing is, just in case people, HRV might be going over their head, it actually is consistent based on your body as well, right? So it'll have a look at your kind of heart rate in the nighttime. That's a big one, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you eat a late
Yeah.
meal or something like that. That's an interesting thing I picked up on recently is I brought dairy back in, just Greek yogurt, good quality stuff. Totally fine with
Mm-hmm.
it. So then I brought in some grass-fed whey protein. So it's obviously
Mm-hmm.
derived from milk, and I can have it and I'm fine. But then what I notice, if I have a little bit too much, it's a problem. And I had some in the nighttime the
Mm-hmm.
other night with my yoga, and then bang,
Mm-hmm.
heart rate was up, sleep was messed up. And it's like, so those kind of things, it helps you really fine tune, doesn't it? And
Yeah,
it just
absolutely.
calculates everything for you, doesn't it? So all you're looking at then is the scores. But HRV, right? I want to talk a bit more on, there's a lot of kind of what's it called? A lot of debate on this. And
Mm-hmm.
now what they're finding, right, long story short, just to give the audience a bit of an idea. So my average HRV this year has probably been around about 125. And that's
Mm-hmm.
like the milliseconds in between each heartbeat, right? So 125 milliseconds,
Mm-hmm.
right, in between each of my
Yeah.
heartbeats on average. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What I've
And
noticed,
that means that, for
yeah,
example, it will mean that there will be zero point 0.9 seconds between one heartbeat and 1 second between the next heartbeat. For
got it.
example,
So then it's the
this
average.
120 milliseconds difference.
Got
You know,
it.
so then 0.880, you know, and then the next one is 1 second. For example, is this very kind of variation between heartbeats? Yeah. And
Got
that
it.
is a very good one. So that will is generally because you're very fit. You probably have a very good VO2 max. It's probably 55 or even better, I would think. So it means that your body is working very smoothly. When you are relaxing, your body is relaxing and working on at a, you know, as a low RPM, so to speak, if you're in the car, you know, and your physiology works very easily, smoothly because you have such a good fitness level, and that
Mm.
will be reflected in your heart rate variability.
And that's interesting you say that, right? Because what I have noticed, I've noticed over the last few years that over the last 2 years, my heart rate variability has actually dropped. So in 2022, it was probably averaging around
Mm.
about 150 or 145, maybe. So high.
Mm.
And then
Yeah.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure out, I'm looking at the trends. I'm like, it's
It
dropped.
will go down. It will go
It
down
will go
because
down. That's
so
okay.
yeah.
I'm getting old.
So and that is yeah. You're getting older, and there's a quite steep decline from 20 down to 40, 40,
Okay.
45. It's kind of a reverse hockey stick. So it gets quite fast down to 40, and then it kind of flattens out and goes down a bit
Interesting.
more slowly the rest of your life. And this is of course why for an athlete to stay at the top of your game at 40 is very, very rare, even if they're making millions of dollars, you know,
Recovery,
and
Alan.
popular and then get all the fame and whatever they want. It's still almost impossible to stay there after you're 40 because your body's not as forgiving. So the exercise that you could recover from at 25, you cannot recover from at 35. Your body's not just that resilient. You can do a lot of things to make it more resilient, you know, by sleeping better, avoiding uses of you know, substances that will take energy, like eating poor food or and different things that you find out, or alcohol. So you can do and do some cold plunges. So you can do some things to mitigate the decline in resilience, but it's nowhere. We're all dying, you know. So we're all losing energy, and death, you know, in the end is just a lack of energy, so to speak. That your mitochondria is just not performing. They don't have the energy. How do you say metabolism compatible with life. So we're just deteriorating, and but we can do so much we can actually, there's a huge American research showing that if we do the right things, that is more or less the same strategies in the pulse cure, we can live 24 years longer than if we didn't do those good things. So there's a lot to be gained from getting a better lifestyle, both in the moment, in well-being and health in the moment, but also for longevity. And so the same thing that we have to do for production, and I see in the back of your bookshelf there that you have the Diary of a CEO, you know,
Yes, that's
and
right. I
the
love that one.
podcast, and like he says it, that health is the basis of performance. If you don't have health, you cannot perform. So, so it's so important that also for business people, for people living their everyday lives to to have a good health, to have a good stress levels that they can perform at their best. And although we have these devices that are developed for the athletes, we can all use it in our everyday lives because we are also affected by stress and need to be very good at recovery, just as they do. So we just learn from them, from the athletes.
And I've got like three clients right now, which are coming to my mind. I think two are in their 40s, one's in his 50s, and they're healthy, metabolically healthy. You know, they're all in good shape, take care of themselves for the most part. But they've all got quite a low, at least we got the aura ring, and they've all got, you know, one of them, the HRV is like, you know, averaging around about 30. The other one is like in the
Hmm.
40s. And yeah, two are in their 40s in terms of
Hmm.
the heart rate variability. As I said, just for some context, I know I had a high one. Mine is like, say, 120. And I know breath work you mentioned, right? And I noticed a difference
Hmm.
as well. I was doing more consistent breath work last year, and I noticed my sleep, my recovery, it did definitely improve. And more importantly, though, just the mental and emotional stress. Like you said, I
Mm.
feel when I'm in that rest and digest state, when I'm doing deep breathing, I can feel my body calming down and my thoughts slowing down, and it just prepares me for sleep.
Mm.
It's kind of what I do before bedtime, not every night, but long story short, you mentioned breath work can have a positive impact. And even for people who are not tracking this, just in general, breath work can be really good for stress management, right?
Mm.
I'd
Yep.
love to know how you kind of recommend using that for people as a tool.
Yeah, I think that mainly what you need to do is to breathe more slowly. So I think exactly there will probably be differences that some breath techniques will be better than others, but in general, just breathing more slowly and probably down to 6 breaths a minute, that is a very good way to calm your system down. And of course, your breath is always available and is also invisible. So even if you're in a meeting or a conversation or anywhere, and you are breathing more slowly, nobody will notice, you know. So it's always accessible. So it's kind of a lever into your autonomic nervous system that you can control. So yeah, just breathe slowly, but preferably maybe, as I say in the book, 4 seconds in and 6 seconds out, so that your out breath is a little bit longer than your in breath. And of course, there's other techniques like box breathing, you know, breathing 4 seconds, holding, breathing out 4 seconds, holding, and
Well,
so
that's my
on.
favorite one because it's so
Um,
simple, and I feel your heart rate has to slow down, right? When you're holding your breath for that long,
yeah,
no choice, is it?
yeah,
So,
yeah. And what you're really doing is to trick, I'm calling the autonomic nervous system that we share with all vertebrates. Okay, it's hundreds of millions of years old. And it's kind of the living fossil in our brain because the bottom of our brain, the autonomic nervous system, the reptile brain is largely unchanged, you know, for the last 100 million years, which is why we can do research on rats and we can use it for our own, you know, information. And breathing slowly is a clear signal to this ancient system that has no idea even that we're humans or living in the 2024. That it's a sign to this ancient fossil that it's calm out there and you can relax. You can do the restorative work now. You don't have to be mobilized and be on guard. You know, everything is calm now. So it's a way of hijacking or hacking into our system and tricking it into believing that everything is calm, even if it's just before you go on stage, you know, for a presentation, you know. So it's a kind of fooling your system. And breathwork, as you say, is so important. There are other kinds of breathwork as well, but I think to keep it simple, just breathe slowly. Of course, breathe with your nose. Of course, our mouth is made for eating and our nose for breathing. And many people, I must say that also, many people would have an advantage if they will tape their mouth at night. So if you're a mouth breather at night, it can also affect your heart rate variability. And one way to find this out is just to try the tape. And if your heart rate variability is better when you're taping, then you're probably mouth breathing through the night. You know, of course, you wouldn't necessarily know that, you know, you're asleep. But if your heart rate variability has a difference between with and without the tape, then it's a sign that you're a mouth breather.
mm. And you also mentioned earlier, right, about either the average person really is not moving enough, right? They're not consistent enough with training, but
Mm,
overtraining is also a problem as well. And I think there's a fine line,
absolutely.
right? We have the data, and that's good because then you can manage it, like we said.
Mm,
But also,
mm,
people, you kind of know when you're hitting the sweet spot with things, you just feel better. Your energy is more sustained than everything else, right? But that's a
mm.
big thing as well, right? People, not training appropriately,
Yeah. And many people, and of course, for your audience and most audiences on the podcast that I'm on, it's not undertraining that is a problem because they're not listening to the podcast anyway. You know, they're watching, you know, some dance show on
That's
TV
a
or
really good
wherever they
point. I
be.
was thinking that just then.
So
The nail
so
on the
so
head.
so the podcast audience really that are interested in health, they are usually training too much, you know, compared to their general stress level. So you need to have these trackers to often to train less actually, or to train more according to the circumstances. For women, you know, particularly because the menstrual cycle, will give them so much difference in their available forces and the recovery. So the women with a tendency to PMS symptoms will find that the week before menstruation, the HRV will go down considerably. And I can see that it goes down as much as if you're having a COVID infection for 1 week. So it's kind of one COVID week every month, for many years. And if they don't adjust their intensity and duration of their exercise, they're just pushing themselves down. So the Norwegian soccer ladies, the national team, they will have the Aura Ring to be able to adjust their training according to the menstrual cycle. So that is very, very important. Um, so I don't remember where I was now, but
No, no, no. That was you were talking about the overtraining as well, right? And that's
overtraining, right, right. So you can easily overtrain because you don't have the same quality of recovery then for that week before menstruation. So it will depend on your daytime job as well. Many people will train as hard as professional athletes, even if they have busy, stressful jobs. And you cannot do that. It is not sustainable over time. So you have to, and then the Garmin watches is by far the best because they will give you a training readiness every day that will show how ready are you to push this day. And heart rate variability is such a much better metric because so many athletes they use for example, the Garmin watches. They put it on when they're training to adjust their zones, the heart rate zones, to get the right level. But it's more important to see how the heart reacts to it after the session. And the Garmin watches is the best ones for that. They will give you a recovery time after your workout, and in the morning it will give you a training readiness. And your heart rate variability, and this is based on heart rate variability, because the heart rate variability is such a more precise metric for overtraining than just your nighttime heart rate. I have seen athletes who have been in overtraining, and they have had maybe just 2 beats difference in their heart rate, maybe like for 42 to 44. And that is often what they have used to determine whether they are overtrained. But at this small difference in heart rate, they can have like difference between 60 and 110 difference in heart rate variability. So that is much more important metric to gauge the overtraining when you have the heart rate variability instead of just a heart rate.
100%, yeah. And I love talking to my audience, right? Because ultimately we're talking to, I know a lot of people listening to this, it's all or nothing as well, right? They might struggle with. So they go all in and they find it hard to be consistent with certain things, right? With this is rife with most people, right? Even
Mm.
could say disciplined people or people that will more likely overtrain the type A type, they might go all
Yeah.
in and then they fall off. They're not consistent enough for long periods. And a lot of that, I have a lot of people who reach out to me who I take on as clients. And what I find is they're in motion with their training, but they may even be consistent, right? But they're not training. They're training too much. They're training too much volume, too much intensity, and they're chasing the
Mm.
feeling. This is what I see a lot of people. They're chasing that release they get mentally, right? We all need that. I mean, it's mental health, right? We're training. That's the main driver for most people. We want to look good.
Mm.
They take that too far and they're chasing that feeling of, pushing themselves and they get that release of
Yeah.
cortisol. And then they might,
Yeah.
overeat on the weekends. I'm sure people can relate to this. Maybe sometimes you overeat or whatever. And then you'll push yourself in the gym the next day, which is what I used to do, by the way. And the reality is
Mm.
we're doing the opposite. So it kind of blows people's mind when they come in to my program, for example, and I just add in the smart piece, take down the volume they're doing per session, for example, with strength training and spread that out. So they're training at a less
Mm.
intensity, but they're training the body parts. The volume is spread out rather than hammering each session. And then they look
Mm.
and they're like, I don't feel like I'm doing enough. You sure I'm doing enough? And we're like, well,
Mm.
look at these photos. We look at your body stats.
Mm.
It's working, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah, and that is what is so important because I used to be on the national team as a kayaker back in the day, and we used to just push hard every time, maximum heart rate, for like 40 minutes every day, probably just before competitions and just afterwards as well. Had no idea of recovery because when you get better, that is in the recovery phase. You're breaking down your body, so exercising is kind of toxic to your body. And then if you don't allow it to build itself stronger, which is what happens in the recovery phase, then you're just not improving. And the best athletes, at least for endurance, 80% of their exercise is in zone two, but longer, and maybe 20% is in the high zone. So and many amateurs will just think that, okay, no pain, no gain. Every time you put on your gym clothes, you're going all out there. So and you need to, in addition to that, you need to know that you have energy to invest, because of course, things like alcohol, food that you're just creating inflammation, that is just kind of money out of the window, just ripping apart dollars. Um, but exercise and cold plunges and so on, and mental challenges, that is an investment. You will build yourself stronger from the expenditure of these forces. But you need to know that you have kind of money to invest. If you are pushed, if you have a lot of strain elsewhere in your life, you may not have the energy available or needed to invest in this exercise. So you need to see the totality of your lifestyle. And then there's no better way than to track your heart rate variability through the wearables.
I'd love to know, Dr. Torkil, right, what you recommend, like what works for you in terms of optimizing, like what are the most important fundamental things for you with your own routine, optimizing
Mm-hmm.
HRV and managing stress? 'Cause I'm just thinking of all the kind of high achievers listening to this, right? And they might
Mm-hmm.
want to optimize their performance running their business or in their professional life and just
Mm-hmm.
productive, optimize energy, but also most people listening also want to improve the way their body looks, right? So ideally, we
Yeah.
want we want performance, we want to feel good, and we want to look good. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, you're ticking those
Yeah.
boxes. So I'd love to know.
Yeah, and then you really need to have a good control of your budget, your body budget, as I call it in the
Body
book,
budget.
to be able to do that. You need to see what comes in, you need to see what goes out, just like in a business or your personal economy. But this is your physiology. So the first thing I would say, if you have some desire to perform at your best or not being sick, then cutting down on alcohol or almost cutting it totally out, just keeping the most important, for celebrations, for certain occasions. That would be the most important. According to Whoop, alcohol is the worst stressor of all. And that is even though we think it's de-stressing, just like I used to drink, and I've done all the mistakes in my book. I used to drink a couple of glasses of wine every day. I remember traveling around Australia with this Coolaba, these wine casks, because we used to think it was good, and it used to feel, like you were calming down, but you can see, through your wearables that is a horrible stress. Okay, so cutting down on alcohol or adjusting it to your liking, or it would be the most important. And then to prioritize sleep. If you don't know
You're
the
good,
book
look one.
Why We Sleep, from Matthew Walker. It's an Australian, I believe.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I've
it's
read
a,
that
it's a
book.
great book. Yeah. So you need good sleep consistency. You need to make sure that your sleep is restorative, and the only way to find that out is to measure it, because how you feel when you wake up in the morning it's not necessarily correlated to the quality of your sleep, because you may have woken up from an REM sleep or a light sleep or whatever. So having the wearables to see how restorative your sleep has been, that is very important. And then you need to find the right balance regarding workout. That's important. And then most people will find that their food is maybe the factor that they will see on the wearables, like you have seen. And for me, I'm rarely stressed. So the main stressor in my life, that is different kind of foods, like chili, like mustard, like certain kinds of meat, like ultra processed food, like candy, sweets, all of these things is terrible for the stress level. So we kind of find out, the discussion now with ultra processed food and whole foods. You can see that whole foods in general is better, and that ultra processed food with fast carbohydrates is terrible for your stress levels. And then, of course, when you see that, you're less motivated to eat it as well, particularly late at night, when you see that your sleep is wrecked. So it's this motivational factor in all this too. Um, yeah, and then do the cold plunges, do the breath work, being able to see your speed, because suddenly you see that you're speeding, you're at 110 miles an hour in a city, so when you see your speed level, it's so much easier to do breath work or just to calm yourself down, to realize that, okay, I'm stressed now. um, I need to be calmer here. I need to relax a little bit, take a short break, and such things. So yeah, that would be the most important things,
Yeah, that makes sense.
I
And
guess. Yeah.
that was great the way you put that down. But I was speaking to obviously Paul Taylor, as you know, the other day, and I was just saying to him, the bedtime routine, I think, is where most people fall down. And it comes down
Mm,
to discipline. It comes down to the fact that that phone is so addictive, right? We're stuck on the phone, or people might be even
mm,
checking emails or scrolling on social media. That's what most people are doing, let's be honest, right? Because it literally
mm,
it's so addictive, right? Those the way they design those social media platforms, right? And people
mm,
just
mm,
on their phones till too late, right? And they're not. And
mm,
for me, that's just a non-negotiable habit now. Ideally, for me, I'll
mm.
come away from electronics 90 minutes. That's a sweet spot for me, 90 minutes. If I could do longer,
Yeah.
I would, right? But we got to work and stuff. And I feel like a lot of people, like even Paul was saying, he struggled. Like he says, 30 minutes. Like that's his thing. If
Mm,
they come away from their phone 30 minutes before bed, but that blue light,
mm,
circadian rhythm, and obviously the cortisol levels and stuff before bed is something I think
mm.
people overlook, and they
Yeah.
don't make it a priority enough, and put the work in with that.
Yeah. So you need to fine tune your circadian rhythm, like getting light early in the morning. Now I'm here in Norway. It's still, yeah, probably 9 a.m. It's just barely getting light here. So I have the daylight lamps here, to get this light in the morning. And then in the evening to wind down the last 1 to 2 hours before sleep, dim the lights, read a book instead of scrolling on your phone. But it also depends, so you may be surprised. Some people may find that watching TV is stressful. Others will find that it's calming them down. Some people find that scrolling on your phone is calming them down. So it depends what you find out,
Mm.
how your body reacts to a certain thing. And while we, as doctors, when we get a research result, maybe say from 10,000 people, and they're wondering whether scrolling late at night is stressful, we would get an average, and it would be all different results. The results would be all over. So even though the average would be a certain amount of stress, for a certain person it might be calming them down, and from another person it might be stressing them
I
horribly,
can imagine
but
loads of
we
people.
only get the
Yeah.
average.
I can imagine loads of people justifying it now, going, "See, I knew it was relaxing me. I knew it was fine to stay on
Mm.
my." No, but the thing
Yeah.
again, that's where it comes down to tracking again, right? Tracking and being aware of it.
Yeah, yeah, because I know that for some people it's calming,
Mm,
For
yeah.
some people it's a way to sleep better. So these wearables is a tool for personalized medicine, to see how does your body work. It doesn't matter what the average does, as long as you're in some other place. So it will
Cognitive
depend for
stimulation
me.
as well. And
What's that?
it's interesting you say it's cognitive stimulation, right? Which is like sometimes the issue
Yeah.
with bed. Because I noticed last week I
Mm,
got a little bit sloppy with my bedtime routine, and I was watching TV. I was watching like Joe Rogan podcasts and stuff on TV. And
mm,
I found like
mm,
one or two nights it was fine. I was watching like a relaxing episode. Then there was another one where it was like it was kind of like more stimulating. And I went to bed.
mm,
I'm like, why am I so kind of like feeling stimulated right now? I couldn't go to sleep as fast and stuff. And it's like, so it really
mm.
depends on what's going to stimulate your brain as well, right?
Mm, yeah,
Sweet
absolutely.
spot for you.
And what I do in bed is that I use my iPhone and I have it in the book app. So I'm reading books on a dark screen, as dark as possible, and just reading. And it has to be a book that is quite interesting, but not too interesting either, because you want to go to
Yeah.
sleep and maybe you read like 15 pages and then you're just falling asleep almost by yourself. So there's different ways to do it. So reading on a dark screen I find is very, very useful. Also, if I wake up in the middle of the night, I can, and if I can't go back to sleep, even after doing breath work and calming myself down, I can actually just read on this dark screen without waking up my wife. So it's you can use it in this way too.
Awesome. No, that's a good point because I'm reading a really good book right now, and I found it hard to put it down the other night. I'm like, you should put it down now. And then obviously you end up staying up late because you're reading a good book. But yeah, I even say to some clients, even if you're like listening to a podcast or listening to an audiobook or whatever, or reading the book, it's always going to be better than having that stimulation from blue light, right? Generally. And it's just another form
Mm.
of discipline as well, right? I feel like having a bedtime
Yeah.
ritual and just any time
Mm.
because I feel like that's the next level now for almost like the human race. I feel like I heard
Mm.
something great just on a podcast. Actually, Stephen Bartlett was just talking about it. He was saying about we
Mm.
need to spend less time in the trenches and more time in the clouds. And what he meant by that is out in nature. Because he said he went on a
Mm.
trip with his girl, and they were out
Mm.
in the river in England, no devices, no nothing, raining, waiting for a fish to come.
Mm.
And he said all the problems that he had that he couldn't solve, they all, like most of them just came back. He just solved them there and then because he was being present.
Yeah.
And there's a thing called
Yeah.
mind wandering now as well. And I know that's the next level for me. And I feel like now with all this technology, it's great. It's amazing we're here now. But I feel
Mm.
like we're going to need to do more and more of that kind of out in nature unplugging.
Absolutely. And so there's so many things about nature, and that is one of the big problems for our stress levels, that we are just 97% of the time we're outside of nature. And there's a lot of problems with that, even the sunshine, of course. And it's been a big debate in Australia, I know. And of course, we lack sunshine. Of course, the energy from the sun, which is pure energy, electromagnetic radiation, uh, affects our cells and makes them more efficient, uh, making them produce nitric oxide, melatonin. The mitochondria works better, and just sun exposure is so important for our health. So actually, Australia has, I think, 30% less heart disease than the UK, and they believe that a lot of that is because of the lack of sun exposure in the UK compared to Australia. So we need more sun, and more nature. And as you say, that Stephen Bartlett from the Diary of the CEO podcast just points out that when he's out in nature, he solves the problems that he's struggling with in his office. And that is because when we are resting, so resting is a very productive state. Many people, many business-minded people think that they have to produce to be in the on mode. But in the brain, there is a default mode network, so that when we relax, for example, by being out in nature, for example, by doing a walk or being in the shower, or doing something routinely, then our default mode network kicks in, and it will work the brain in a different way. It will connect emotions, memories, and new ideas in another way. It's other centers of the brain that will work in the default mode network than in the executive network. And we need this mix between this. We need to have been in the office and pondering some problem that we're struggling with, and then we need to go out and relax and kind of do nothing, or do something very easy. It's very hard to do nothing. That's painful. That's horrible. This is almost impossible for humans.
Yeah.
But to do something, just walking, is kind of the minimum effort and the most easy thing we can do. And that will trigger this default mode network, and then you will get the idea. That is how Einstein got his ideas, and that is how Agatha Christie got the plot for her novels, and the crimes and so on. So people in the business world need to know that the restful state is a productive state. It's good for performance, good for creativity. And there's been a huge research study from Anders Ericsson on the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, and other places, that show that the best people were the ones. Also, they did these 10,000 hours of work, but they also were the best at resting. They slept one more 1 hour more than the second best ones. And they found that to be true across categories, you know. So if you're a musician or a business people or an athlete, the best resters, so to speak, they had the best results.
Mm. Yeah, it makes a lot of
But
sense.
you cannot rest after relaxing, you know. So
Mm.
so that is not productive. But after a workout, then you need to rest, you know.
It's something I find really
So
hard.
so the sickest people are just resting, you know,
Yeah, exactly. They're doing.
getting weak.
That's the thing. They're just getting weak. They haven't got physical strength and they're not testing their heart out and they're not applying enough stress essentially because stress plus rest equals growth essentially, right? That's kind of what
Yeah,
simple
that's right.
equation, isn't it? But yeah, nature is
Yeah.
definitely something I need to do more of. And I always feel like a new man when I go out in nature. I feel so much better when I go to the beach here or I go to the even to the park. But that's something after listening to that podcast, I'm like, I definitely need to spend more time in the clouds. No phone over Christmas time. I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it. And I feel like with the way, and I heard something else as well, and this is kind of my last question for you as well. I heard something about the way technology is going now and AI. Like I'm 37, right? But if you're someone between the age of 40 and 60, the next 3 months, advancements in technology, or the next year, sorry, the next 3 months will be the equivalent of 1 year, right? Of what we've
Hmm.
just. So think about it in 20 years, right? Twenty years of technology, if that makes sense, is going to go by basically in a few years' time, right? What, 4 or 5 years or something, right? So the way
Yeah.
things are moving now with technology and AI and everything else is great. But I feel like to unplug and to actually be out in nature and be connecting with other humans, I feel like that's becoming more and more important now, for our health.
Yeah, yeah, because what we find out with this technology is that if we work more, if we live more than how we were developed through evolution, we're getting healthier. So the technology kind of the future that of course is already here now points back in time to the lifestyle that our physiology is evolved to work at the optimum.
Mm,
And there's so much, you know, so it's a huge shift in the healthcare system. So we have been as doctor trained to, and the healthcare system is geared towards waiting until you get sick and then we do something. And that is just now that we know how important lifestyle is, that is not possible anymore. It is not going to work out. So the wearables is a way to shift the power from the healthcare system until your own hands, but it's also a huge shift in not anymore waiting until you get sick and then do something, but to do something to avoid that you're getting sick. And through these devices, through stress management, optimizing or normalization of your health, it will make sure that you're not getting any unnecessary, avoidable diseases that you could have prevented just living a better lifestyle. So
mm,
it's a huge shift in the healthcare system. And the future is already here, and it's frustrating because most doctors have no idea of this. Any of your listeners probably that are not doctors that would have paid attention would know more about these things than probably 80% of the doctors. It's probably exactly the same in Australia. I think it's the same
100%.
all over the world. They're
100%.
just trusting what they learned, you know, 20, 30 years ago. And the healthcare system is governed by the senior doctors, and that was kind of 40 years ago or so since they went to school, you know, so doctor school. So these new advancements in technology and knowledge of preventative medicine is it's just passing them by, and maybe just 5 to 10% of the doctors know these things that have been talking about now.
100%. Yeah, really appreciate your time, man. There was so much gold in there and so much value for the audience. The other thing I wanted to ask you is what we were touching on then. What is it you're the most excited about right now, Dr. Torkil, about the future with the way AI is going and technology when it comes to trends in HRV and health, longevity, all those kind of things, stress management? What is it you're most
Mm.
excited about now? I just want to say one more thing, though. The
Uh,
bottom line is
yeah.
most people listen to this, they'll hopefully discipline most people, right? But that's always going to be the foundation, right? Something that can't be taught. All these things require discipline, right? But the first step is always awareness, right? Which is where tech comes in.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm also excited about is the totality of it. I think the huge shift, that we get the power as people over our health, that we can see all the different factors and when the artificial intelligence can see the UV exposure, what you're eating compared to, and combine all this, that because the AI, of course, kind of knows everything, combines everything that you can find out from your measurements and from the knowledge, the combined knowledge that it has. That I think is just this tool is just incredible. It will revolutionize. I'm sure the whole healthcare system for the ones who wants to have better health. The 60% of the population that are kind of sleepwalking, they're not gonna use it probably. But for us, maybe the 30-40% of the health conscious people who wants to live a long, productive, exciting life, this is it's a total game changer.
100%. And it gets, I don't want to say addictive, but it gets really, what's the word? Rewarding, right? It gets rewarding when you're
Yeah.
performing and feeling at your best. As a
Mm.
side effect, you look at your best and you're like, why
Yeah.
wouldn't I want to invest my time, energy, and money into these things to better myself
Yeah.
and good quality food as
Yeah,
well?
yeah, absolutely. You can either invest in it or pay the price afterwards. And now
100%.
you can invest in it controlled, and deliberately. If you wait until you get sick, it's out of your control. Then you're depending on the doctor, you're depending on the treatment, and you're depending on luck, basically. So there's an effort either controlled in beforehand and avoiding disease, or there's a huge effort outside your control after you get sick.
Mm,
So you don't get to choose to avoid the effort. That
exactly.
that would be nice, but that's not an option.
100%. 100%. So, man, really, really enjoyed that. There's so much value in there for the audience. Where can we find you? Where can the audience find you, Dr. Torville?
I think they can find me on Instagram, Dr. Torkil. Otherwise, of course, in the book, the Pulse Cure is also an audiobook, ebook and audiobook. And the paperback, it may be a bit hard to get it in Australia in the paperback form because I think it's sent from England or so. But the Audible, and most of your audience probably would be like having an Audible instead. They're maybe
Hmm.
training or running or
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
some workout and can get wiser as they do it.
Awesome, man. I'll share all of that into the show notes. So thanks again for your time, man.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, great to be here.
You too.